What's up, everybody? James Bushell here, and welcome to the second ever installment of What's the Difference? In this video series, I choose a character and then examine the differences in the storyline and actions of said character from the book to the show. Now, in this series, I will not be picking out every single minute detail. However, I will try and pick out what I perceive to be major differences. This week's character is none other than Miss Lemon Cakes herself, Sansa Stark. Now, surprising enough, the beginning of Season 1 and the beginning of Game of Thrones are relatively similar. We lose an early scene, however, from the books, where Septa Mordane is overseeing Arya, Sansa, Princess Myrcella, Beth Cassel, and Jane Poole doing some needlework. During this scene, we see the, excuse my pun, stark differences between the two Stark daughters. We see Sansa truly in her element as the prim and proper lady, and we see the wild child Arya fail miserably in this task and is admonished by Septa Mordane in the process. I see why this scene was cut, but it would have been nice to have in the show, to show the differences between Arya and Sansa as soon as possible. And I think it would have made the naming of Needle make more sense. That being said, the road to King's Landing is relatively similar, with a few minor differences here and there. In both versions, Joffrey, Baratheon, and Sansa stumble upon Arya and Micah, the butcher's boy, on the banks of the Trident. We all know what happens from there. Nymeria bites Joffrey, Nymeria escapes, Arya goes missing for a day, and back at Derry, Cersei has Lady killed in Nymeria's place. This is obviously a very important event for Sansa, as the losing of her direwolf has a profound effect on her, and many agree, after the death of Lady, Sansa is a little lost. And perhaps maybe, some of her Stark connection maybe being severed some. But once again, aside from that, some minor differences here and there, these events were rather similar. In King's Landing, however, things get a little different. One of those major differences is the hands tourney, which we get through Sansa's POV in the book. In the book, it is explained in much more detail and was a 2-day affair. We got a lot more than just the joust in the books, as we also got the archery competition, which was won by Anguy, who becomes a relevant character in Arya's storyline. And the melee competition, which was won by Thoros of Myr, a personal favorite of mine, and his flaming sword. We see many relevant characters in this chapter in the books that will have, importance, later in the books that are competing in the tourney, such as Jon Royce, Beric Dondarrion, Lothar Brune, Balon Swan, and Jason Mallister. In the show we've gotten Jon Royce a little bit and barely got Beric Dondarrion. Those other guys, though, they're not in the show. And they're all great characters that, have a bigger presence in the books than on the show, for sure. The show mainly focuses on just the Hound, who I don't even think in the show, I don't even think he was even competing in the tourney. The Mountain and Loras. There's also the absence of Jane Poole, which I believe was quite the mistake not to have in the show, as I believe she is quite significant. More on that later. After the first day of the tourney, Sansa is at the feast with all the other nobles. She is taken aback with Joffrey, of course, and afterwards, Joffrey has Sansa escorted back to the castle as the night goes on by the Hound. And this wasn't in the show. And during this encounter, we see the beginning of an interesting dynamic between these two characters. It's definitely a different dynamic than what we got on the show. They had interaction on the show, but it was different. It was definitely different than it was in the books. My assumption is the showrunners changed it due to the differences in age between Rory McCann, who played the Hound, and Sophie Turner, who played Sansa. The second day of the tourney in the books is essentially what we got on the show. There's a few subtle differences, but that is neither here nor there. Next up, we have the scene where, we have the scene from the show and in the books where Ned tells the girls that they must pack up. And they're going to head back to Winterfell. Ned tells Sansa that she's no longer going to marry Joffrey, essentially. In the show, Sansa does throw a fit, but not to the extent in the books. She was throwing quite the tantrum in the books. A full-on temper tantrum. And, I'll side with show Sansa on this one. I definitely see, there's a lot of people that don't like Sansa from the books, mainly because of her naivety, with Joffrey and, how childish she acts, but I personally like Sansa. I think she's grown a lot from this particular event that happened early in the first book. Well, not early in the first book, I guess it happened kind of midway in the first book. That being said, the rest of the events that lead up to Lord Eddard's execution are relatively similar, with one major difference. In the books, after that whole thing went down, Ned and, them taking out House Stark and everything, she's held in the keep with Jane Poole. And eventually the guards take Jane Poole away, leaving Sansa, to be worried about her best friend. I've already delved into the importance of Jane Poole and how I believe the showrunners messed that one up, and we will definitely get into that later. In Clash, things are relatively similar. She's a hostage in both iterations, and she armors herself in her lady courtesies, and she goes through the motions of denouncing her family as traitors, and she becomes more jaded towards Joffrey in both versions, rightfully so. She's beaten by the Kingsguard by the order of Joffrey in both versions. But in the books, the beatings were more frequent, and by different characters like Boros Blunt. I think Aerys Oakheart had to. He didn't want to, but he had to. As I believe his beatings were were the most gentle beatings. That being said, relatively similar. The next major difference, however, is the interaction between her and Dantos Hollard. First, the introduction of Dantos Hollard is different in the books in general than it was in the show. In the books, he was not clothed beneath the waist, and his junk was flopping all over the place. That was a change I was perfectly fine with. Aside from that, the part was essentially the same. Joffrey wants to kill him, Sansa speaks out saying it's bad luck to kill on his name day, and Sandor backs her up. And Dantos is named the Royal Fool. However, their relationship is different on the show. In the show, it's virtually non-existent. They have that first scene that I was just talking about, and then they have one more scene where Dantos stalks her in the gardens and then gives her the necklace, tells them that it's a family heirloom and that he wants her to have it. Of course, that's the necklace that is used in the Purple Wedding. And then the next time you see them together, he's whisking her away from the wedding after Joffrey's death, and then onto the boat, where he is eventually killed. In the books, they frequently meet in the Godswood at night, and they have this thing where they call each other Florian and Jonquil, which was a tale about Jonquil falling in love with Florian the Fool. Obviously, Florian was Dantos and Jonquil was Sansa. Anyway, I was fine with this change because those meetings weren't necessary in the show at all by any means. I did not enjoy them in the books. I thought they were just whatever. Did not care about Dantos in the books. And I don't know what you guys... I always kind of got a pedo vibe from Dantos in the books, not on the show, but on the books he was always asking for kisses and all this stuff, and I just wasn't... I wasn't a huge fan of his character in general. The rest of Clash is once again surprisingly similar, aside from the chapter in the books where Sansa meets Dantos in the Godswood. The scene where Tyrion stops her from being beaten happens. The riots in King's Landing happens. It was a little, obviously the riots were, it was after they see Myrcella off to Dorne, and she is saved by the Hound. From her perspective, it's relatively similar. There was some different people involved, like Aeron Santagar, they got killed. There was, I forget the Lannister name, they got dragged off and never found again. There was different people involved, but from her point of view, it was relatively similar. She had to be saved from, she had to be saved, essentially, by the Hound. And then the Blackwater happens, and she essentially has the same role she had in the show as she had in the books as well during Blackwater. She has a chat with a very drunk Cersei that is relatively similar. However, the interaction between her and the extremely drunk Sandor is different. Once again, the show put less emphasis on the romantic dynamic of their relationship, because I believe the age difference, once again, between Rory McCann and Sophie Turner were pretty significant. It didn't really bother me too much because I know that people really care about the Hounds and Sansa's relationship. I'm not one. I can respect that you like it, but I don't really care. What happens between Sandor and Sansa, I could really care less, to be honest. So it didn't bother me that much. They changed that all up. In the beginning of A Storm of Swords, we get the scene with Sansa, Lady Olenna, and Marjorie Tyrell. This scene is relatively similar, with some differences, however. First off, Loras escorts Sansa to the two Tyrell women. In the process of their small talk, Sansa deeply offends Loras by bringing up Renly. This didn't happen in the show, but that's relatively insignificant. Also, the Tyrell women raised the possibility of Sansa being freed from King's Landing by marrying her off to Tyrell, to the Tyrell heir, Willis, whom isn't even in the show. However, the plan to take her to Highgarden was still included in the show, but instead of marrying her off to Willis, she was going to be married to Loras. And it was thwarted all the same. In the book, Sansa tells Dantos, who warns her not to go and tells her the Tyrells are not to be trusted. Of course, this backfires on Sansa, telling Dantos, because even though because she doesn't know at the time that Dantos is actually working with Littlefinger, and informs him of the Tyrell ploy. Whereas in the show, Dantos is kind of cut out as the middleman when it comes to this situation, as Littlefinger learns the information via Olyvar, who learned the information by betting Loras. I, of course, prefer the way it happened in the books much more than on the show, because I did not like what the show did to Loras, and I was also disappointed that we didn't get Garland and Willis in the show. So I don't agree with those the changes the showrunners made when it comes to that regard, especially since George himself said it was a mistake that they cut out Garland and Willis. Now we're going to discuss the difference in the dynamic between Sansa and Tyrion and their relationship. Of course, in both mediums, Tywin catches wind of the Tyrell plot and promptly and swiftly has Tyrion married to Sansa, to block the future North Tyrell power block, essentially. Their wedding and reception is relatively similar, however, the biggest change is their relationship as a whole. In the books, Sansa is a lot more antagonistic when it comes to their relationship. They don't share any good times. Sure, Tyrion was relatively cordial with Sansa, but he wasn't necessarily Prince Charming like he is on the show. In the show, they paint Tyrion as this white knight who does no wrong. And trust me, I have a lot of things to say on a What's the Difference Tyrion episode that I'll do in the future. That being said, Sansa sticks up for Tyrion later when she is talking to her Aunt Lysa at the Eyrie on the show. Where in the book, she was disgusted by him and wanted nothing to do with him. Hell, it's even, possibly foreshadowed that she's going to kill him with the Ghost of Highheart prophecy. But that's another debate. Anyway, book Tyrion, he still respects her and doesn't consummate the marriage. He does get naked and gets hard while laying with her, but, I completely understand why that part was cut out of the show. Of course, this change was propagated by the fact that they consistently want to portray Tyrion in a positive light. Because they feel, I think they like the character. So, and I like Tyrion, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't change the fact that he is occasionally, an insolent little shit. He turned a singer into a bowl of brown because it suited his fancy. So, that's off on a little tangent. We'll get to that in a future video. Anyway, moving on to the Purple Wedding. It's virtually the same. I'm sure there were some differences, but nothing major enough to mention. Let me know if there was in the comments, but I actually think they did a relatively faithful adaptation. I know, of course, there was probably, there was some things different, but nothing major that I can remember. Moving on to her escape, however, out of King's Landing, there was... The major difference here was, after Dantos' murder, Sansa and Littlefinger went to the Fingers, where they chilled for a few days, essentially. We learned some intrigue about the Kettleblacks and their true allegiances. We meet characters like Lothar Brune and Oswald Kettleblack, who actually rode them out of Blackwater. And, we also get the return of Marillion at the Fingers. At the Fingers, Marillion essentially tries to rape Sansa, but is stopped by Lothar Brune. I understand why this whole scene was cut, as characters like Lothar Brune and the Kettleblacks were not in the show. However, I still think it was a mistake to cut Marillion's tongue off in Season 1, and essentially from the show altogether. Because when we get to the Moon Door scene, I'll explain why. But, that being said, one thing, they changed from the book to the show was that they made Littlefinger a lot less subtle about his role in the Purple Wedding. It was implied in the books that was the case, but it was a lot more subtle. In the show, it was heavy-handed. It was essentially a confession by Littlefinger and Lady Olenna that they were the ones that killed Joffrey. So I like that a lot better in the books. In the show, Sansa and Littlefinger arrived to the Eyrie via the Bloody Gate, where in the books they were part of the escort with Lady Lysa, as Lysa and her entourage met Sansa at Littlefinger at the Fingers, and they got married there. Where on the show they had the marriage at the Eyrie, and had that, what in my opinion was a ridiculous kind of exposition scene, where like Lysa reveals to the audience all the scheming that her and Littlefinger did. I thought it was kind of ridiculous, because it didn't seem like a genuine conversation that they would have to me at that point. Like they know that they schemed together and they're having this conversation together. I thought it was a little ridiculous, but that's just me. That being said, the rest of the time, up until Lysa getting shoved out the moon door was relatively similar. We got Sansa building Winterfell in the snow, the Littlefinger pedo kiss, and the subsequent Sweet Robin tantrum. And the reason, Sansa hitting Sweet Robin, which, what in her mind was why Lysa was going crazy at first. The major difference, of course, was what happened after Lysa got shoved out the moon door. In the books, Merlion was present, as he was playing music and singing incredibly loud to drown out Sansa's cries for help, and was the one to take the fall for Lady Lysa's death. As Littlefinger concocted the story about his motivations to kill Lady Lysa, Merlion's motivations, that is. In the show, however, obviously Merlion is not present. They have Sansa come in and talk to Jan Royce, Lady, Anya Waynwood, and Sir Vance Corbray, and she essentially saves Littlefinger's bacon by lying for him. I do not like this change at all in the show, because it turned Littlefinger into somewhat of a buffoon, in my opinion. There's no way that Book Littlefinger would have put himself in that situation without thinking it through and having some plan to get out of it. He wouldn't have allowed himself to be saved at the whim of a young girl. And it's just not like, it's just not Littlefinger that I don't like about it. I also didn't like, really like the fact that Sansa having, to lie to cover for Littlefinger. I just don't think Book Sansa would have done that. I don't know, maybe she would, but anyway, moving on. So this is where things really changed for Sansa. Between A Feast for Crows and Season 5. I personally love Sansa's chapters in Feast, her Elaine chapters. We see her maturing some. She is taking care of Sweet Robin. She's becoming a mother figure to him. We get a glimpse of what's going on in the Eyrie politically between Littlefinger and the Lords Declarant. We see how Littlefinger plays the game by giving Nestor Royce the Gates of the Moon, and having Lyn Corbray stage, a fit and has him draw a sword during the parley between the Lords Declarant and Littlefinger, and it gives Littlefinger the leverage of demanding a trial period as Warden of Robert Arryn due to the breach of hospitality. We see Sansa wisening up as she correctly guesses some of Littlefinger's schemes, like why he had Nestor Royce gain control of the Gates of the Moon. And she correctly guesses that Lyn Corbray is on Littlefinger's payroll and that the incident was staged. We get the chapter in the book, where winter is coming and the court, including Sansa, all leave the Eyrie, for the Gates of the Moon. I personally enjoyed this chapter, as we had some good dialogue between Sansa, Miranda Royce, and Maya Stone. And we also got Littlefinger to reveal his plans for Sansa to marry, to wed Aeria the Hare. And, an eventual plan to reveal her true nature, her real identity, and to reclaim Winterfell. I personally think that her story in Feast was miles ahead of what happened to Sansa in Season 5. As we all know, Sansa was, Season 5 was not good to Sansa. They essentially kind of merged her character with Jane Poole. She once again became a victim and needed Theon to save her at the end of Season 5 by pushing Miranda off the ledge for them to escape from Winterfell. In A Feast for Crows, she was starting to see the big picture. She was learning and adapting and maturing, in my opinion. The show went a different route, and that route I did not particularly agree with. I mean, you guys can let me know in the comments if you thought her Season 5 arc was good. I didn't. That being said, it's not even the fact that they kept her as a victim, it's also the drastic changes that happen in Season 5 in general. It just makes things convoluted as a whole. Where is she going in the books now? I don't know what, her endgame in the books. I don't know what her endgame in the show is. I actually think that in Season 6, from some of the things I've been hearing, from leaks and pictures and stuff like that, is that instead of the North rallying around Rickon, that they're going to rally around Sansa. I think she's going to get the North Remember speech. I don't know if that's true, but regardless, everything is muddled now, and I just don't know really what to think. So, in the comments, let me know what you give me some Season 6 predictions for Sansa. I'd love to hear them. But of course, while, I'd love to hear what you guys, think. And so tell me if you guys think if I missed anything major. I probably did. I mean, it was a lot of stuff. But, this one was a interesting one to write. And I had fun doing it. I've had a lot of requests to do more in the future. What's the differences? So for my next one, I've narrowed it down to Stannis or Tyrion. So I'd like to know from you guys which one out of those two that you'd like to see me do more. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, share it on social media, and subscribe. And that's all for this installment of What's the Difference? And we'll see you on the next one. Take care.